The galaxy's deadliest predator was not the scaly Vortis, but his captive, the human spy Louis Cox, and the Binar commander would soon regret not killing Louis when he had the chance. "Have you unearthed any useful intelligence?" Vortis watched with interest as the neural probe delved into every corner of the spy's mind, rooting through memories. This human was providing sport. Vortis always enjoyed a stubborn prisoner. As the metallic tendrils withdrew, Louis stared defiantly through one blackened eye, the other swollen completely shut. "You have doomed your race, Vortis," he spat. "For decades the Imperium has believed they were the hunters. But it was humanity doing the hunting. We have agents on every Binar planet and ship. We know your plans, your technology, your weaknesses." The commander scoffed. Lies, they couldn't be true. Before he could respond, an anxious voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, scout ship Zath reporting anomalous energy signatures originating from human frontier outpost H-229. Vortis zoomed in a view screen. Strange. The outpost looked unremarkable. A blasted rock floating on the fringes of Binar space. But if the humans considered it worth defending... "All ships set course for outpost H-229. Engage ultra drives." The mighty Binar fleet lurched into light speed. Louis, bloody and bruised, began to chuckle. It built into maniacal laughter bordering on madness. "Do you realize what you've done? You've sealed your fate. All of you." The human's swollen lips twisted into a savage grin. "We laid this trap for you, Vortis. We are the apex predators, and now the hunters will become the hunted." Vortis barked orders to his troops as the fleet neared the human outpost. "Prepare for ground assault. We'll wipe this miserable rock clean of the human filth." His soldiers scrambled to their battle stations, checking weapons and armor. The Binar commander was not concerned. One lone outpost against the might of his armada? The humans were fools. But as the ships hit the exosphere, alarms started blaring on the bridge. A thick, gel-like substance was materializing around the hulls, engulfing the ships like insects trapped in amber. Vortis stared at the view screens in disbelief as the ooze crept over the fleet. "Weapons offline," a technician shouted. "Engines not responding. We're dead in space." The commander slammed a scaly fist on the console. How? What was this? As he watched, the substance seemed to melt through the hull, infiltrating the ship's systems like a virus. The mighty Binar fleet, pride of the Imperium, was now drifting helplessly above their target. On the barren plains below, hidden hatches hissed open in the planet's surface. Louis and his team emerged from their bunkers like wolves scenting blood. Gone was the broken captive. In his place stood a predator, lithe and lethal, eyes glinting with savage anticipation. Louis activated his suit's stealth field and vanished from view. The hunt was on. Slipping unseen through the corridors of the flagship, Louis was a wraith, a whisper of death stalking the Binar crew. He sealed bulkheads and vented atmosphere with ruthless precision, turning the ship into a maze of traps and dead ends. Panicked screams echoed through the halls as Binars were picked off one by one, their weapons useless, their claws scrambling futilely at sealed hatches as the air was sucked from their lungs. Vortis could only watch the carnage unfold, a dawning horror gripping him as he realized the depths of his miscalculation. In a shadowed chamber down on the planet, the masterminds behind the trap gathered to watch their handiwork. Holographic displays cast an eerie blue glow over their faces as they observed the spreading chaos above. "The Binars have taken the bait," one murmured, his smile cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Now let us show them the true face of the galaxy's deadliest predator." Vortis's heart raced as he sealed the bulkhead door to the control room, his claws shaking as he input the lockdown codes. The screams of his crew echoed through the ship, each one cut off with a sickening finality. He had to call for help, had to warn the rest of the Imperium about the monster they had unwittingly unleashed. He lunged for the communication console, his fingers flying over the keys as he tried to establish a link with the nearest Binar outpost, but the screen remained dark, the system unresponsive. Vortis slammed his fist against the console in frustration, a sinking realization settling in his gut. The humans had planned for this, had somehow jammed all outgoing signals. Desperation clawed at him as he turned to the ship's data archives, hoping against hope that he might find something, anything, that could help him understand his enemy. He scrolled through the files, his eyes widening as he delved deeper into the records of human history. What he saw there made his blood run cold. War, conflict, predation. These were the threads that wove through the tapestry of human existence. They were a species that had been forged in the crucible of endless struggle, each challenge honing them into something sharper, something deadlier. They adapted, evolved, turned their enemies' strengths against them with a cunning that bordered on the supernatural. Vortis felt a creeping sense of dread as he realized the true nature of the foe he faced. The Binars had not just underestimated the humans, they had awoken a slumbering beast, a predator without equal in the galaxy. A hiss of sparks, and the groan of straining metal snapped Vortis back to the present. Lewis was at the door, the humans' weapons already cutting through the thick alloy like a scalpel through flesh. Vortis reached for his sidearm, his hand trembling as he raised it to aim at the slowly widening gap. But even as he prepared to make his last stand, a part of him knew it was futile. He was facing an adversary that had been shaped by millennia of unrelenting warfare, a creature of pure, distilled lethality. In the dim chamber far below, the architects of humanity's grand design watched the unfolding scene with a cold, clinical fascination. They had spent decades preparing for this moment, carefully positioning their pieces on the galactic chessboard. The Binars were merely the first to fall, a sacrificial pawn in a much larger game. As Louis closed in on his final prey, the shadowy figures turned their attention to the next phase of their plan, a scheme that would reshape the very foundations of the cosmos. The Binars were just the beginning, one of them intoned, his voice barely more than a whisper. Now it is time to show the rest of the galaxy what humanity is truly capable of. In the darkened control room, the air crackled with tension as Lewis and Vortis faced off, neither moving a muscle. Vortis's eyes darted around the room, his mind racing as he tried to process the revelations about humanity's true nature. Desperate to gain some advantage, he began to speak, his voice low and taunting. "You think you've won, human? The Binar Empire has conquered 1,000 worlds, crushed 1,000 species beneath our claws. What chance do you think your pitiful kind has against us?" Louis remained still as a statue, his expression unreadable. He met Vortis's gaze with cold, predatory eyes, seeing through the Binar's bravado. Vortis was stalling, trying to buy time, but Louis knew better than to take the bait. Suddenly the ship shuddered as alarms blared to life, the control room bathed in pulsing red light. Vortis's head snapped up, a flicker of hope in his eyes as he saw the sensor readings. A Binar reinforcement fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace, summoned by a hidden failsafe. They were converging on the human outpost, ready to annihilate the human forces. In the outpost's command center, the shadowy figures leapt into action, their faces set with grim determination. They had foreseen this possibility and had a devastating countermeasure ready. With a few quick keystrokes, they unleashed a swarm of advanced human fighter drones, each one piloted by a highly skilled human operator. The drones, sleek and deadly, powered up their cutting-edge weapons and engaged their cloaking fields, vanishing from sight as they streaked towards the Binar fleet. The Binar ships, caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of the human drones, scrambled to mount a defense. But it was too late. The human drones wove through the Binar formations with uncanny precision, their weapons slicing through shields and hulls like a scalpel. On the flagship bridge, Vortis could only watch in horror as his reinforcements were systematically picked apart by the human drones. Louis seized the moment of distraction, lunging forward and knocking Vortis's weapon from his claws with a lightning-fast strike. In the blink of an eye, he had the Binar commander pinned to the deck, his forearm pressed against Vortis's throat. Vortis stared up at Louis, his eyes wide with a dawning realization. This was no mere soldier he faced, but something far more terrifying, the living embodiment of humanity's relentless will to survive and conquer. As Louis pressed down harder, Vortis managed to choke out a single question. What are you? Lewis leaned in close, his breath hot against Vortis's scales. When he spoke, his voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to fill the entire room. With Vortis defeated, Louis and his team swept through the Binar flagship with brutal efficiency, securing deck after deck. But as they delved deeper into the ship's bowels, they stumbled upon a chilling sight that stopped them dead in their tracks. Row upon row of stasis pods lined the walls, each one containing a dormant Binar soldier. Cables snaked from the pods, connecting them to a central neural network that pulsed with an eerie alien light. Lewis approached one of the pods, peering through the frosted glass at the slumbering Binar inside. "My God," he whispered, "they're all linked together, sharing information, coordinating their actions." He turned to his team, his face grim. "This is how they've been able to outmaneuver us at every turn. It's not just superior technology, it's a hive mind." Lewis knew what he had to do. This neural network was the key to the Binar's military might. If he could destroy it, if he could sever the connections that bound the Binar soldiers together, humanity might stand a chance. He made his way to the central control console, his fingers flying over the keys as he initiated the ship's self-destruct sequence. But just as he was about to enter the final command, a sudden movement caught his eye. One of the stasis pods had opened, and a Binar soldier stumbled out, disoriented and confused. Lewis whirled around, his weapon trained on the alien, his finger tightening on the trigger. But something made him hesitate. The Binar looked up at him, and in that moment Lewis saw something in the alien's eyes that he had never expected to see. Fear. Pure, primal fear, the same fear that he had seen in the eyes of countless human soldiers on countless battlefields. In that instant, Louis realized that the Binars, for all their technological superiority, were not so different from humans. They too were driven by the same basic instincts, the same desperate need to survive, to protect their own kind. But before he could process this revelation, a hidden failsafe within the neural network activated, sending a signal to all the dormant Binar soldiers. One by one, the stasis pods began to open, releasing hundreds of disoriented but heavily armed Binars into the ship's corridors. Lewis and his team found themselves outnumbered and outgunned, forced to fight a desperate rearguard action as they made their way to the escape pods. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, searing the bulkheads and filling the corridors with the acrid stench of ozone. In the chaos of the battle, Louis became separated from his team. He found himself alone in the ship's darkened corridors, pursued by Binar soldiers who moved with an eerie, unnatural coordination, as if guided by a single predatory intelligence. Louis ran, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the Binars behind him, their footsteps echoing through the metal halls, drawing ever closer. As he fought for his life, dodging plasma bolts and returning fire whenever he could, Louis began to understand the true nature of the threat facing humanity. The Binars were not just a hostile alien race, but a hive mind, a collective consciousness that would stop at nothing to ensure its own survival. And he knew that this was just the beginning. The Binars would not stop until humanity was either conquered or destroyed. This was not just a battle, but the opening salvo in a long and brutal war, a war that would push humanity to the very brink of extinction. Lewis gritted his teeth and kept running, his weapon clutched tightly in his hands. He had to find a way off this ship, had to warn the rest of humanity about the true nature of the threat they faced. But deep down, he knew that even if he escaped, even if he made it back to human space, the war was far from over. It had only just begun, and the galaxy would tremble before it was done. Louis sprinted through the darkened corridors of the Binar flagship, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his armor battered and scarred from countless skirmishes. The ship shuddered and groaned around him, the hull straining under the onslaught of the human drones outside. Alarms blared, red light pulsing in time with the chaos. He rounded a corner, his weapon at the ready, and found himself face to face with a squad of Binar soldiers. They chittered and hissed, their eyes glinting with malice as they raised their plasma rifles. Louis didn't hesitate. He opened fire, his shots precise and deadly, each one finding its mark in a spray of sparks and viscera. The Binars fell, their bodies twitching and jerking on the deck, but more were coming. Always more. Louis could hear their footsteps echoing through the halls, the relentless march of a hive mind bent on his destruction. Ducking into a side passage, Louis consulted the schematics he'd downloaded into his suit's computer. The escape pods were 2 decks down, past the engine room and the armory. He'd have to fight his way through, but there was no other choice. Taking a deep breath, Louis plunged into the fray once more. Plasma bolts sizzled past his head, scorching the bulkheads and filling the air with the acrid stench of burnt metal. He returned fire, his movements fluid and precise, honed by years of training and a lifetime of struggle. But even as he fought, Louis could feel his strength waning. His armor was battered and torn, his weapons running low on charge. He was a predator, yes, but even predators could be brought down by numbers and sheer, unrelenting force. At last he reached the escape pod bay. The doors were sealed, the control panel a smoldering ruin of fused circuitry. Louis didn't break stride. He slammed his fist into the panel, his armored gauntlet shattering the casing and exposing the wires beneath. A few deft twists, a surge of power, and the doors shuddered open. Louis stumbled inside, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the Binars behind him, their claws scrabbling against the deck, their voices rising in a chittering chorus of rage and bloodlust. With a final effort, Louis hauled himself into the nearest pod and slammed his hand down on the launch controls. The pod shuddered and bucked as it blasted free of the ship, the sudden acceleration slamming Louis back into his seat. Through the pod's viewport, he watched as the Binar flagship receded into the distance, a twisted mass of metal wreathed in flames and debris. But even as he watched, a new horror unfolded before his eyes. The Binar reinforcement fleet, drawn by the distress signal from the flagship, was emerging from hyperspace. Dozens of ships, each one bristling with weapons and shielding, each one crewed by hundreds of Binar soldiers, all linked together by the insidious neural network that Louis had discovered. They were coming for him, coming to finish what they had started, to erase the stain of humanity from the galaxy once and for all. In that moment, Louis knew what he had to do. With shaking hands, he activated the hidden protocol in his suit's computer, the one that he had hoped never to use, the one that was meant for a moment just like this. A coded signal burst from the pod, racing towards the human outpost on the planet below. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a flash of light that seared Louis's eyes even through the pod's tinted viewport, a massive electromagnetic pulse erupted from the outpost. It engulfed the Binar fleet in a wave of crackling energy, frying circuits and overloading systems. Ships tumbled and spun, their engines dying, their weapons falling silent. One by one, they began to fall towards the planet, trailing flames and debris like meteors in the night sky. Louis's pod, shielded from the pulse by its own hardened systems, made a rough landing on the planet's surface. The impact threw him forward in his restraints, the breath knocked from his lungs by the sudden stop. For a long moment he lay there, his head spinning, his body aching from a dozen wounds. Then, with a groan of effort, he released the restraints and staggered to his feet. The pod's hatch opened with a hiss of escaping air, and Louis stepped out onto the barren landscape. The sight that greeted him was one of utter devastation. The remains of the Binar fleet lay scattered across the plain, twisted hulks of metal and composite that smoldered and sparked in the darkness. And among the wreckage, Louis could see the bodies of countless Binar soldiers, their forms twisted and deformed by the pulse's energy. But even more chilling than the carnage were the signs of what lay beneath. As Louis picked his way through the debris, he began to notice a pattern in the way the wreckage was distributed. It wasn't random, but rather seemed to form a sort of network, a web of interlocking paths and nodes that stretched out into the distance. With growing horror, Louis realized that this was no mere battlefield. It was a staging ground, a hidden base from which the Binars had been launching their invasion of human space. And beneath his feet, stretching down into the planet's crust, was a vast, underground labyrinth, a network of tunnels and chambers that could house an army. Louis's mind raced as he considered the implications. How long had the Binars been here, burrowing beneath the surface like termites in a wooden beam? How many other bases like this one might they have scattered throughout the galaxy, waiting to be activated at the proper moment? And perhaps most chilling of all, what secrets might they have uncovered in their relentless study of human history and psychology? What weaknesses might they have found? What pressure points might they be ready to exploit? Louis knew that he had to find out. He had to infiltrate this base, to map its contours and uncover its secrets. He had to find a way to destroy it, to stop the Binars before they could launch their next attack. But as he set off into the darkness, his weapon at the ready, his suit's sensors probing the gloom ahead, Louis couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, that he was entering a realm where the line between predator and prey had become hopelessly blurred, where the very nature of the hunt had been turned on its head. He was a soldier, a warrior, a predator in his own right. But as he descended into the depths of the Binar stronghold, Louis couldn't escape the cold certainty that he was also something else. Louis descended deeper into the bowels of the Binar stronghold, his weapon at the ready. His senses strained for any sign of movement. The air grew thick and heavy, the walls seeming to pulse with a sickly organic rhythm. Strange symbols glowed on the walls, alien glyphs that seemed to writhe and twist before his eyes. At last he emerged into a vast chamber, the heart of the underground complex. And there, at the center of it all, stood a towering machine, a monstrosity of pulsating flesh and metal that seemed to throb with a malevolent intelligence. Louis approached the machine, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was the key to the Binar's power, the nexus through which they controlled their soldiers and coordinated their attacks. If he could destroy it, he might be able to turn the tide of the war. But as he drew closer, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Vortis, his body broken and twisted, his voice a grating rasp. "You fool," he hissed, his words laced with static. "You have no idea what you're up against." Louis raised his weapon, but Vortis merely laughed. "The invasion of your pitiful colonies was only the beginning," he said. "We have a greater plan, a vision that will reshape the galaxy itself." He spoke of a hidden fleet, a vast armada waiting in the depths of space, of a terrible weapon that could amplify the Binar hive mind to engulf entire star systems, turning every living being into a slave to their will. Louis listened in horror, his mind reeling. How could they hope to fight against such a threat? How could they stop a foe that sought to assimilate all life into its twisted collective? Vortis's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound like the skittering of 1,000 insects. "It's too late," he rasped. "Our plan is already in motion. You cannot stop us." He spoke of a final revelation, a truth that would shatter Louis's understanding of the galaxy itself. But before he could say more, Louis acted. He fired his weapon at the central machine, unleashing a storm of energy that ripped through the chamber. The machine shuddered and convulsed, its surface cracking and splitting as the destructive cascade tore through its core. Vortis screamed, a sound of rage and agony that seemed to come from 1,000 throats at once. But it was too late. The machine was coming apart, the heart of the Binar network collapsing in on itself. Louis turned and ran, racing for the surface as the chamber collapsed around him. Rubble and debris rained down from above, the very foundations of the complex shaking and buckling. At last he emerged into the open air, his lungs burning, his mind spinning with the implications of what he had learned. He had struck a blow against the Binars, yes, but he knew that the true fight was only just beginning. Somewhere out there a hidden fleet waited, a terrible weapon poised to unleash its fury upon the galaxy, and at the heart of it all, a truth that threatened to unravel everything Louis thought he knew. He would have to find that truth, to journey to the very heart of the Binar Empire, and confront the darkness that lurked there. For if he failed, if the Binars succeeded in their plan, then all of humanity, all life itself, would be consumed by the chittering madness of the hive. Louis clawed his way out of the underground labyrinth, his lungs burning as he gulped down the stale, recycled air of the planet's surface. His mind reeled with the revelations he had uncovered, the true scope of the Bynarr threat looming like a shadow over everything he had ever known. A flurry of movement caught his eye, and he spun around, his weapon at the ready. But instead of the chittering hordes of Bynarr soldiers, he found himself face to face with a squad of human Special Forces operatives, their armor scuffed and scorched from battle. "Sergeant Louis Cox," the lead operative asked, his voice gruff and measured. "We've been sent to extract you. Command needs to debrief you on the situation." Louis lowered his weapon, relief flooding through him. He followed the operatives to their waiting dropship, the hum of its engines a comforting sound amidst the eerie silence of the planet's surface. As they lifted off, the squad leader turned to Louis, his face grim. "The destruction of the Bynarr hive mind has thrown their forces into disarray," he said. "We've got a brief window of opportunity to strike back." He brought up a holographic display, the image of a massive space station rotating slowly above a field of asteroids. "This is a key Bynarr staging ground," he explained. "Heavily fortified, hidden in the heart of an asteroid field. We believe it's the key to their planned final assault." Louis studied the image, his mind racing. The revelations from his encounter with Vortis were still fresh in his mind, the true scope of the Bynarr plan, a looming spectre over everything. "We need to destroy it," he said, his voice steady despite the churning of his thoughts. "Buy ourselves some time to prepare for what's coming." The squad leader nodded, his expression grim. "That's the plan, but it won't be easy. The Bynarrs have thrown everything they have at defending that station." Louis took a deep breath, his grip tightening on his weapon. "I'll lead the assault," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've seen the true face of the enemy. I know what we're up against." The operatives exchanged glances, a flicker of uncertainty passing between them. But they knew as well as Louis did that they had no choice. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. As the human fleet approached the asteroid field, a swarm of Bynarr fighter craft emerged from the depths of space, their movements erratic and uncoordinated, without the guidance of the hive mind. The battle was joined in a maelstrom of flashing lasers and exploding ships, the void of space lit up like a hellish fireworks display. Losses mounted on both sides as the human forces fought their way through the Bynarr defenses, the hulls of shattered ships spinning lazily through the void. But at last, they reached the station, its armored hull looming before them like a malevolent beast. Louis and his team boarded the station, fighting their way through twisting corridors and cavernous chambers. The Bynarr soldiers they encountered seemed lost and confused, their movements lacking the eerie coordination that had made them so deadly before. But as they reached the station's central control room, they found themselves confronted by a new horror. The room was filled with strange, pulsating pods, each one containing a human captive, their bodies twisted and deformed by Bynarr technology. Louis felt his stomach turn as he realized the true extent of the Bynarr experiments, the lengths they were willing to go to in order to assimilate humanity into their hive mind. He knew in that moment that he was looking at the future of his species if the Bynarrs were not stopped. With a sense of grim determination, Louis and his team set their charges, the timer counting down with merciless precision. They fought their way back to their ships, the station shuddering and buckling around them as the explosives began to detonate. But even as they caught their breath, Louis knew that this was only the beginning. The true scope of the Bynarr plan was still unfolding, their machinations stretching across the galaxy like a spider's web. And he knew that he would have to find a way to stop them, to unravel their schemes, and bring an end to their twisted ambitions. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, he would fight until his last breath to ensure that humanity survived. Louis returned to Earth, the weight of the galaxy heavy on his shoulders. He was hailed as a hero, his name splashed across headlines, and his face beamed onto screens across the planet. But even as the world celebrated, Louis found no solace in the accolades. His mind was consumed by the horrors he had witnessed, the secrets he had uncovered. In the quiet moments between the parades and the speeches, Louis pored over the data they had captured from the Binars, searching for any scrap of information that might help him understand their true nature. He interrogated the few Binar prisoners they had taken, probing their minds for any weakness, any hint of vulnerability. But the more he learned, the more he came to realize the true scope of the threat they faced. The Binars were not just another alien race, not just another enemy to be defeated. They were something far older, far more sinister. As he delved deeper into their history, Louis began to uncover a chilling pattern. The Binars had been manipulating the galaxy for centuries, sowing seeds of chaos and conflict among the various races. They had pitted species against each other, weakening them for the eventual Binar conquest. Worlds that had once been thriving centers of civilization were now nothing more than ruins, their knowledge and technology lost to the ages. The Binars had wiped them out, leaving no trace of their existence. And as Louis dug deeper, he found evidence of something even more disturbing. The Binars had been experimenting with a new form of biotechnology, a symbiotic life form that could merge with and control other organisms. The implications were staggering. Piece by piece, Louis assembled the clues, his horror growing with each revelation. The Binars were not just a race of conquering aliens, but a cosmic predator, a hive mind that had evolved over millennia to consume and assimilate all life in the galaxy. To the Binars, humans were nothing more than cattle, resources to be harvested and integrated into their twisted collective. And Louis knew that if they were not stopped, the galaxy would be nothing more than a feeding ground, a hunting preserve for the Binar hive. The weight of this realization settled on Louis like a physical burden. He knew that he had to act, that he had to find a way to strike at the very heart of the Binar Empire. But even as he began to plan his next move, doubts and fears crept into his mind. He had seen the power of the Binars firsthand, had felt the icy touch of their hive mind. He knew that he was facing an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, an enemy that had been perfecting the art of conquest for longer than the human race had existed. But he also knew that he had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he was the only one who truly understood the nature of the threat. He had to confront the Binar Queen, had to find a way to end her reign of terror. As he prepared for the final battle, Louis tried to push his fears aside. He focused on the mission, on the steps he would need to take to infiltrate the heart of the Binar Empire. But even as he planned and strategized, he could not shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, that the Binars had been waiting for this moment, had been preparing for it for longer than he could imagine. Louis looked out at the stars, at the vast expanse of the galaxy that he had sworn to protect. He knew that the scars of this war would linger for generations, that the course of human history would be shaped by the outcome of this final battle. But he also knew that he had no choice. He had to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. For the fate of the galaxy, for the fate of all life, he had to succeed. Louis boarded his ship, his team by his side. They were the best of the best, the most skilled and dedicated soldiers humanity had to offer. But even they seemed small in the face of the task ahead, in the face of the enemy they were about to confront. As the ship lifted off, Louis looked back at the Earth, at the blue-green orb that had been his home for so long. He knew that he might never see it again, that this mission might be his last. But he also knew that he had no regrets. He had given his life to this cause, to the defense of humanity and all the races of the galaxy, and if he had to give his life to see it through, then that was a price he was willing to pay. The ship accelerated into the void, the stars blurring into streaks of light. Louis closed his eyes, his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew that the road would be long and hard, that the battles to come would test him in ways he had never been tested before. But he also knew that he would not falter, that he would not fail. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of all life, he would find a way to stop the Binars, to end their reign of terror once and for all. Louis steeled himself as the human fleet hurtled through the void towards the Binar homeworld. a sense of grim determination etched on his face. He knew that this was the moment he had been preparing for, the final confrontation that would decide the fate of the galaxy. As they approached the planet, the scanners lit up with a swarm of contacts. A massive Bynarr fleet far larger than any they had encountered before was moving to intercept them. Lewis gripped the arms of his command chair, his knuckles white as he watched the enemy ships grow larger on the view screen. "All hands battle stations," he barked, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Prepare to engage the enemy." The human ships, sleek and deadly, accelerated to attack speed, their weapons charging with a hum of power. The Bynarrs responded in kind, their own ships bristling with armaments that glowed with a sickly, pulsating light. The two fleets collided in a maelstrom of fire and destruction, the void lit up by the flashes of exploding ships and the searing beams of energy weapons. Louis watched as human ships were torn apart by the Bynarr onslaught, their crews spilling into the void like so much debris. But even as they took losses, the humans fought on with a savage determination, their ships darting and weaving through the Bynarr formation, picking off enemy vessels with surgical precision. Louis felt a surge of pride as he watched his people fight, knowing that they were giving everything they had to protect their species. Slowly, painfully, the humans began to punch a hole through the Bynarr defenses, their ships slipping past the enemy's guns and driving towards the planet's surface. Louis knew that this was their only chance, that if they could just get boots on the ground, they might be able to end this war once and for all. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the human ships were rocked by a new wave of attacks, this time from the planet's surface. Bynarr ground installations, hidden beneath the roiling clouds, opened fire with a barrage of missiles and energy beams, tearing into the human fleet with devastating accuracy. Louis gritted his teeth as his ship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring in the cockpit. He knew that they were taking heavy losses, but he also knew that they had no choice but to press on. With a final desperate push, the human ships broke through the Bynarr defenses and began their descent to the surface. As they approached the landing zone, Louis could see the twisted, nightmarish landscape that awaited them. The Bynarr homeworld was a hellscape of pulsating flesh and writhing tentacles, a living nightmare that seemed to defy all laws of nature. Louis felt a sense of revulsion as he watched the ground approaching, knowing that they were about to set foot in a realm that no human had ever seen before. As the ships touched down, Louis and his team emerged into the fetid air of the Bynarr hive, their weapons at the ready. They knew that they were vastly outnumbered, that the odds were stacked against them in every conceivable way. But they also knew that they were the only ones who could stop the Bynarrs, the only ones who could prevent the galaxy from falling into an endless night of horror and despair. And so, with a final nod to each other, they set off into the heart of the nightmare, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. As they fought their way deeper into the hive, Louis and his team were confronted by a new kind of horror. The Bynarrs they faced were not just soldiers, but twisted abominations of flesh and metal, their bodies fused with the living tissue of the hive in a grotesque symbiosis. And worse still, they discovered the true extent of the Bynarrs' experiments. In the depths of the hive, they found chambers filled with human captives, their bodies twisted and deformed by the Bynarrs' biotechnology. They had been here for years, perhaps decades, subjected to unspeakable tortures as the Bynarrs sought to create the perfect host for their hive mind. Louis felt a surge of rage as he saw the suffering etched on the faces of his fellow humans, knowing that the Bynarrs had been doing this for longer than anyone had ever suspected. He vowed to make them pay for every life they had destroyed, every soul they had consumed in their relentless hunger for domination. But even as they fought on, Louis knew that they were running out of time. The deeper they went into the hive, the more overwhelming the Bynarr presence became. They were surrounded on all sides by a living hell of pulsating flesh and writhing tentacles, a nightmare landscape that seemed to swallow them whole. And then at last they reached the heart of the hive, the chamber where the Bynarr queen held court. She was a monstrous thing, a towering mass of chitinous plates and grasping limbs that seemed to fill the entire cavern. Her eyes, multifaceted and glowing with a malevolent intelligence, fixed upon the humans with a hunger that made Lewis's skin crawl. In that moment he knew that this was the end, that there could be no victory against such a thing. But even as despair threatened to overtake him, he remembered the charge they had brought, the weapon that could end the Bynarr threat once and for all. With a final desperate cry, Louis and his team charged forward, their weapons blazing as they fought to reach the heart of the Queen. The Bynarrs swarmed around them, a tide of claws and teeth that threatened to drag them down into oblivion. But even as they fell one by one, the humans fought on, driven by a determination that bordered on madness. And at last, with a final, desperate lunge, Louis managed to plant the charge at the base of the Queen's massive form. The explosion was blinding, a searing flash of light that engulfed the entire chamber. Louis felt his body disintegrating in the heat, his flesh sloughing away as the shockwave tore through the hive. But even as he died, he knew that he had succeeded, that the Bynarr threat had been eliminated and that humanity was safe, at least for now. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving members of Lewis's team limped back to their ships, their bodies battered and their minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. They knew that they had achieved a great victory, that they had saved countless lives across the galaxy. But they also knew that their victory had come at a terrible cost, that the scars of the war would linger for generations to come. They had seen the true face of the enemy, and they knew that the galaxy was a darker, more dangerous place than they had ever imagined. As they lifted off from the surface of the Bynarr homeworld, one of Lewis's team members, a grizzled veteran named Sergeant Hawkins, stood at the viewport, gazing out at the stars. He had seen more combat than any of them, had witnessed horrors that would have broken a lesser man. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that there were other threats out there, waiting to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting galaxy, and as he watched the stars slip past, he couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold, and whether humanity would be ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The ship accelerated away from the Bynarr homeworld, leaving behind a planet that had once been a living nightmare. But even as they left it behind, the crew knew that the memory of what they had seen would stay with them forever, a reminder of the depths of horror that the universe could contain. As they made the long journey back to Earth, Sergeant Hawkins found himself thinking of Louis, the man who had led them on this impossible mission. He had been a true hero, a warrior who had given his life to save his people from a fate worse than death. And as he looked around at the faces of his fellow survivors, Hawkins knew that they would never forget him, that his sacrifice would be remembered for generations to come. They were the ones who had seen the true face of the enemy, who had looked into the abyss and had come back to tell the tale. But even as they celebrated their victory, Hawkins couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that there were other horrors out there, waiting to be discovered. And he knew that it would fall to people like him, to the survivors of this terrible war, to stand against those horrors and protect the innocent from the darkness that lurked among the stars. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.